Good evening, welcome to MOTS presents MOTS Ado About Nothing.
MOTS Ado About Nothing. MOTS Ado About Nothing.
Where we apply the revolutionary MOTS scale to classic and contemporary literature.
MOTS Ado About Nothing. MOTS Ado About Nothing.
This podcast contains mature content, spoilers, language. You have been warned.
Good evening and welcome to another episode of MOTS Ado About Nothing. My name is Chris Morgan. I am here with Jonathan Ian Manza.
And this is our Halloween episode?
Or another one of the.
Yes.
And Scott Thurlow.
And I am not the Boogeyman, but good evening.
Okay, tonight we're doing Stephen King's classic, The Boogeyman, from his anthology book called Night Shift. And Scott, would you like to give us our logline?
Sure. So I came up with sometimes the Boogeyman is just a boogeyman.
Basically, the book is about a man named Lester Billings, and he goes to see a psychiatrist, Dr. Harper, and he opens up the story basically saying, I killed my kids. I killed all three of my kids. And the doctor's like, what are you talking about? So he tells the story about how he met his wife while he was in college and knocked her up and quit college.
I think he was 21 and she was 18, so she might not have even been in college.
Yeah,
just to be
that's
clear.
True. All right, yeah, good
Small
point.
detail, but go on.
No, that's probably right. So his mother boycotted their wedding because, obviously she had the baby too soon. So they had their first baby, and the guy's kind of an asshole. You think
we'll get to that? Yes, kind of a dick.
So basically, he's a working man. His wife stays at home. They have a kid, and then they have a second kid. And the older of the two kids is in the room, and he's screaming. Every night he's crying, and the dad comes in there and notices like the closet door open. And one by one, they're basically dying different ways. And one of the things that I think the last two kids were saying that they both said Boogeyman. So he blames himself. And basically with his last kid, he heard the Boogeyman. He put the kid in his room and slept by himself because up until then, the third kid was sleeping with his dad. And he knew the Boogeyman was coming for his son, but he's just like, the Boogeyman's basically coming for me. So the last kid, he actually did in a way sacrifice.
Yeah, I was waiting to use that term, but yes.
Yeah.
That's correct.
And that's important because in the end, the doctor's like, well, it wasn't your fault, but you really need therapy. So Dr. Harper goes, go to my nurse out front and schedule every Tuesday and Thursday appointment. So the guy goes out, sees a note that says, on
break or some shit.
Yeah, I'll be back in a minute. He comes back to tell the doctor his nurse isn't there, and he sees the Boogeyman hanging out of the closet holding a mask of Dr. Harper, and he's saying, very nice, very nice.
So nice.
Oh, yeah, and the guy pees himself. Lester pees himself.
Yes, an important detail there.
Okay, so that is the summation of the Boogeyman.
Yes, that is what happens more or less in this story, sure.
And Scott, would you like to open up the discussion?
Sure, so again, as we've been doing with shorter-ish stories, condensing the first three into one, it's sort of hard to parse this one out. Like, if we were traditionally saying, where's the introduction end? I don't know. It's sort of like in medias res, kind of. Guy shows up at a psychiatrist, ostensibly confessing about how he neglected to sort of believe the Boogeyman is real until it was too late. And in that time, the Boogeyman murdered his 3 young children, and he left his wife, etc. So I don't know, I want to say maybe as an average, I'm probably going to give it a 2. It was a good, of course, it's a Stephen King story, so it's a good premise, a good setup. But I don't know, there was something not off. I don't know how to describe it. I wasn't 100% behind this story, even though I enjoyed it overall. Mm-hmm. I think maybe I'll try to do an analogy to when we were discussing Mask of Red Death earlier, last episode, that the middle sort of is weaker than the intro and conclusion would be traditionally to me. So I'll probably give it a 2 based on that.
I don't know how much of the traditional 3-act structure applies to this story.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. It's hard to cut up.
And that's one of the reasons we lump them all together for these shorter stories. It kind of reminds me of, in a way, that balancing of psychological horror and actual monsters
Physical
that
horror,
you find in The Shining, which is not necessarily the movie version of it, but Stephen King's work there. But throughout this, you're not sure whether, at the very end, even though he sees the Boogeyman, I'm not quite sure the Boogeyman actually exists.
Sure, I mean, it's a classic sort of question mark King kind of thing.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
And I thought it was an effective storyline. Basically, it's the main character reiterating the story of how his children died, and he is kind of a white trashy type individual.
He's a hillbilly asshole, kind of.
Yeah. But no, I would say a working class schlub is a better kind of thing, facing something that he can't comprehend.
He's a ridiculous sexist and uses ethnic pejoratives.
Yes, well, I have racist terms for dialogue, which we'll get to, but I mean that is what happens in the story. So, like, not necessarily like we've brought this up. Not that you have to like him as the protagonist, which we'll get to, but I mean he's a character, and this is what his character is like. This is what this dude is like.
But overall, I agree with the two because I felt that the story came to its conclusion. And I know what questions it's asking, and it doesn't answer any of those questions, which are whether this man is a madman who killed his children and is coming up with a justification for it, whether this man has been driven mad by the sudden deaths of his children over time, because almost all the children have been given actual valid medical reasons for why they could have died.
Sure, they have real world explanations.
Yeah. Or whether he is being haunted by the Boogeyman, and I don't think the intention of this story was to answer any of that. But I'm going to say overall, I would give it a 2.
Okay, I did recommend this. It was a story I read when I was in high school, but it was during the 80s. So what is different? No. My whole point is, as I'm reading as I'm reading it, I'm like sitting here going, "There's a lot of stuff that's been very conventional that was in the story since then." But two things that kind of gives me a bias to this, and it's going to affect my score. I'm not going to lie about that. But it scared the shit out of me when I first read it. But secondly, I kind of, if putting it in historical context, being in the 80s, being an avid hard watcher since I was 8 or 9, it kind of introduced to me a style of storytelling.
That's fair enough.
That I've seen many times since, done to greater or lesser effect. And I agree with you guys on everything, but I mean, with that little bit, it's going to push me to a 3.
No, that's fair. Completely fair. Like you said, like we of course mentioned this in other episodes, not just MOTS Ado, but when you read something, when you encounter something when you're young and it forms an impression, of course you have more of an affinity, if you will, nostalgia factor, even if it's still good now 20 years later or whatever.
Yeah, that's one of the things I always liked about King, and why like the anthology Night Shift is one of my favorite books of all time, because his short stories are very, very successful. Sometimes even his greater books can get a little meandering.
Well, we'll discuss King later, but for the purposes of this story.
And also, to put it in context, we all know the 80s was a huge epidemic of boogeymen.
Yeah, a more boogeyman-friendly time.
Yeah.
People were boogieing men all the time, if you will, back then. But anyway, so you're giving it a 3, Chris?
2 and 3, right?
Yep. Ian, themes.
So, oddly enough, we just recently did for Halloween Silence of the Lambs, which is...
Check out that episode.
Yeah, I don't believe that when you cast a psychiatrist as a major player in a work, you go in with that intention of having psychological themes. So there are, although the psychiatrist isn't
that's a good point, actually, yeah.
impactful, he doesn't have much to say aside from prodding the story along and calling out, what's the main character's name? Lester for, perhaps softening the story. It deals with the idea of an adult, a person who grew up too early by having a child before he was ready to, being forced to drop out of college and work with a wife who, again, we don't see the wife's point of view, so I'm not going to, but obviously there are issues with their marriage, and with the fact of children dying over the course and how that psychologically impacts people. I thought it was very effective for addressing that theme, because there's one theme in this work. I would say, and that is the whole focus of this. The horror element really has nothing to do but just a framework for the discussion of the basically this young couple dealing with these tragedies.
No, I mean, I agree with pretty much all of that. I think you're right about most, if not everything you just said. I'm not sure if I have much more to add. I'll just sort of reinforce that, it's the framework point was, I think, pretty well said. Good pointing out on that. Yeah, of course, when you introduce this as the setup, then you're obviously purposely invoking those kinds of themes, or at least using them in some aspects. So I think you're right. It's sort of as perhaps a slice of life, as we like to say, but with a bit of the uncanny, if you will, thrown in. Perhaps it exists, perhaps not. We'll talk about that. But I think nevertheless, that theme was handled effectively. And I can't really think, maybe Chris, you got something that other themes that were sort of maybe underneath that?
I was while I was reading this, it was really funny because I think Stephen King has kids. I'm pretty sure he does.
Yes, I believe he does.
And I'm trying to figure out when he had kids.
Mm.
I was actually looking up while you were talking.
Well,
I was listening to you.
I will talk about children shortly, but sure.
Yeah, because he has 3 kids, and it doesn't really say when they're born. But I'm sitting here wondering when I was reading this if this isn't a manifestation of his fears as a new father.
When was Night Shift published? Do you remember? Was it?
It was
like
published in
an earlier one?
'83, but I think
Okay.
the story is from '76.
So was he like coking out and drugging out back then?
Probably not then. But I was
All right.
wondering if part of that
You
had
said
to do with his dad.
76.
He might have been.
I believe it was '76.
But there was, I believe,
The
again,
same. Sorry,
The
King.
Shining was
The same.
written around a similar time
Yeah.
to that, and that deals with the idea of issues with
Marriage
being a
and
parent
children.
and
Yeah, that's
all
true.
that. So yeah, again, I feel it's tied very much. I really liked his reference of the fact that you do love one of your children more than the others, and like that's a thing that you don't hear often.
It's kind of
in
a social faux pas,
yeah.
but still, sure.
So again, I overall enjoy the themes. I thought they were well done.
Yeah, I'll probably give themes a 1 for sure.
Yes.
A stronger one even.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it a 1.
All right.
Scott.
All right, so I'm on to antagonist, the Boogeyman. I guess again, it sort of depends how you want to call it, based upon what you interpret is real or not. How much of it is in his own mind that he's justifying, like perhaps just an unfortunate series of plagues, really, that happened in his life, and because of his situation, getting married young, not ready for it, not ready to have kids, and perhaps it was just crib death, or some kind of another natural thing, or perhaps the Boogeyman really was coming out of the closet,
Right.
and like shadowily, stealthily murdering his children and stalking him, and really is wearing a doctor mask, if you will, at the end, a human skin mask or whatever it was.
May I jump in for
Sure.
a second? Well, I don't think it matters whether
Right,
the
well,
Boogeyman
I was
is
getting to
real or
that,
not,
but
yeah.
sure. Like, yeah, of course, like, whether or not, how much reality or weight or not you put into that, I still think it's effective because he certainly, as I sort of am going to channel Stephen Ormosi, who is not here, he's off getting murdered in the woods himself tonight for Halloween. But, he was antagonized by something, whether his own trauma that he manifested or whether an actual, manifestation of the Boogeyman, if you will. So I think it was effective, however much stock you put into whether it's real or not, or somewhere in between.
So it's either the Boogeyman or Lester Bangs is his own
Yeah,
antagonist.
he's kind of a dick too, which
Lester Billings, sorry.
which we'll get to.
But like whether Lester Billings is the villain of the story or the an unfortunate soul trapped in this thing, the idea is that it's still that Boogeyman.
Something is haunting him. Yeah, sure. I agree.
Whether it's a guilty conscience, whether it's actual creature, it doesn't matter. It's effective.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, I agree.
I totally agree.
So I'm going to give it a 1.
All right,
So we're all giving it a 1.
I believe so.
And to me, it's protagonist. Well, the protagonist is without question Lester Billings.
Mr. Billings.
And if we are going to discuss him as a human being, he's pretty terrible. But as a protagonist, I thought he was pretty effective.
Well, of
Because
course, like, yeah.
there was
Sorry,
a
you go
point
on.
in time, because as we were talking about before, as one of you brought up, that his wife wasn't there to protect, to add any input, so you're just getting his impression. And as things happen, he goes from being in love, it's just like we were poor, but the 3 of us were living together, and it was great. And then you get to see the separation of his life where at one point he said he thought he loved the kid just to piss his wife off.
Yeah, and to spite her or something like that. Yeah. That was a good line. Sure, you're right. Like, he's not the most, perhaps, likable dude in the world.
No.
In fact, he's sort of a racist, sexist asshole when you get right down to it. But, like we just said, some misfortune he's clearly suffered in his life and is dealing with it in not the most healthy way. It's driving him mad, really. Whether or not, again, he's being actually haunted and stalked by It Follows or whatever, the Boogeyman, or it's just guilt tearing him up.
Although, yeah, you're right. He is a jerk in many, many ways, and that's too soft of a word to use for some of these elements of him. There are a lot of redeeming qualities to him when he says,
Sure,
when he
he's
discusses
not
his
just an asshole.
third son
Mhm.
and how he realized how much he loved him and like was doing things for this son that he never could have imagined himself doing. He does come across as sympathetic and sometimes as pathetic.
He's conflicted at
But,
least, but yeah, I mean,
No, I agree. There were definitely times where you forget that, all this stuff and you really do feel for the guy. I mean, he does have dimension.
sure,
without
exactly.
question.
I think that's well said. And I'll have to give him a pretty solid 1 because, yeah, whether or not he was likable in quotes, as we just discussed briefly, he was effective, and I'll have to give it a 1 on that.
I have to say this also goes to King that he's very effective with developing characters.
Yes, totally.
I would say pretty dimensional characters, even though he tends to give them character traits and run 3 character traits and run with them very strongly.
I mean, that's pretty well said, but sure, that's not necessarily bad. But it's funny that you point that out, but I sort of agree with it, and I think the case holds true here.
I'm definitely giving it 1.
All right.
So,
yeah,
1's all around.
1's all around. And just a point to answer what we were talking about before. The Boogeyman was a short story first published in March 1973 of the magazine Cavalier.
Sure, but when was it written? Was my question, because he could have been drugging out, is what I'm saying.
I don't know when he started drugging out.
King has admitted that, his early career, he was doing dope and stuff and coke. I'm just saying.
No,
he's an alcoholic for most of it.
And that too, yeah.
It very well could be. I mean, that was the problem he had with The Shining, is that he didn't address the alcoholism part. But I think this may have been one of those. I think, because you did bring the thing up to The Shining, he was wrestling with some demons in this.
Yeah, sure.
His own boogeyman.
His own boogeyman.
He is his own boogeyman.
So, Ian.
Anyway.
It's on to supporting characters.
0 next.
Yeah. Absence, lack thereof.
Yeah,
it's not bad. I can't,
it's 0 by omission.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a knock against the story and all. In any case, maybe the boogeyman, but not really.
No, because I was just about to say, I'm like, does it count if there is just one person's exposition or
the absent nurse?
No, I agree with you.
The dead kids. I'll give them a 1.
Ian said the best. There is none. 0. Okay, and we're moving on to Scott with dialogue.
All right, so I have a couple of my notes. Yeah, racist sexism. He uses the N-word a number of times and is sort of demeaning a bit to his wife, as we said. And sure, we're only getting his side of the story. But of course, I had to appreciate the part where he bitches about how terrible having kids are. They're annoying and they suck all your resources. You start to hate them. Yeah, but I mean, it rounds out his character. And I guess what I want to say about the dialogue in general is that it feels very natural. It's sort of like guy on the street, talking. You don't agree?
No, because that's another of King's strengths that he works with. He develops a very real character who speak in, obviously because of New York, because he mentions the Mets at one point, or at least somewhere
something
in the area.
That, yeah.
And it feels very much like, for instance, when it takes place in Maine, or when it takes place in New England, and
right.
His characters speak differently depending on the location. He writes that very well, and it gives that personality to them.
I definitely agree. Yeah, it has a liveliness to it, even though it's not the most flowery thing. But because it's so believably realistic, I think is the biggest credit and strength there.
And what I liked about it, the dialogue, his stories, is that they were very, contradictory, conflicting. I mean, he was definitely, grabbing between what is love, what is hate, what is violence, what is not. I mean, when he talks about his past, I mean, there's so much conveyed in the dialogue and the movie and the memories he chooses to share, about his mom, that he is afraid of the water because she just was so, overprotective about it. I mean, it really did add a lot of dimension.
There is one aspect to this, to give an example of the character development through dialogue. So, yeah, he's happy to use racial slurs and kind of sexist language. But there's one part where he's about to curse, and he changes it to the buttocks. He goes,
talking about his kid, I believe. Yeah.
Yes. But the idea is that he has a level of kind of social propriety there. Where,
that's funny. Yeah.
Sure. This is offensive to say in this company, but using racial slur isn't offensive to say in this company, and it adds all these little nuance in dialogue to his character, which is very interesting.
I definitely agree.
And all the things he said that were inappropriate to say, the one thing he censors himself on is his ass.
Yes. Yeah, it's sort of maybe a little comedic touch there, but I mean, it still adds something to it all. So I'm giving it a 1.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, and it's to me with style. I think it kind of said it all. I mean,
I think
putting it in context,
we just sort of covered it pretty well. It's sort of one and the same kind of.
Putting it in context for me, I mean, if this is the first time you're reading it, you're gonna look back and there's a style of storytelling that's here that's has been utilized since, but taking that aside, I think it's effective, and I'll give it a 1.
Yeah, I mean, I like King just in general, and even though I have never read this particular story before. It's very, you can recognize it as a King story, and I enjoyed it. And sort of as I just said, kind of goes hand in hand with dialogue, and at least for this, again, in this instance, But yeah, it's just a very well. King is a craftsman, I'll say that, and he just knows how to tell a story. And this one is no exception.
It's a mediocre King story, in all honesty, but it's still
But
Stephen
that
King
means it's
knows
a King
what he's
story.
doing,
Yeah, exactly.
as you mentioned. And yeah, if you like his style, you'll like this one. I like his style, so I'm giving it a 1.
It's a very competent King story.
Yes, agreed.
Okay, and Ian.
In all honesty, I can't, because
I know what you're going to say.
there are
I
many
know why.
other
Yes.
King stories I'd
Exactly.
recommend before
That's
this.
Ian's go-to skill. I knew you were going to say that,
Yeah.
but I mean, I get where you're coming from. I'm actually sort of undecided myself. Did you have anything else to add?
I mean, yeah, I can read even short stories of his, but like, I don't think this would be a good first introduction to Stephen King. But I think that if you're reading Night Shift, that we're from, then you come across this, you'll be like, oh, sorry. What was it? Different Seasons actually has my least favorite King story in it, but nonetheless, it's like this one's okay. But there are much better works by him, so I can't like.
Yeah, I don't know, Chris. What do you got? Try to convince me either way.
Okay. Well, again, it's I read this book 30 years ago, and I was really excited about the story. I was really excited about rereading it, and I recommended it to you guys, and I recommended it to my wife. So yeah, I got to give it a 1.
Sure. Didn't really give me any reasons why, though. But
No.
I get it. I totally get it. I mean, that is a reason, and I, of course, have said the same exact thing myself.
But as we said before, I think it's a really competent King story. I think it's got a lot of, for lack of a better word, Kingisms.
Yes.
Like
It's a King story.
yeah, it's. I think it's more one of my favorites for sentimental reasons more
Sure.
than like
I said,
objective
I
reasons.
get it. It's nostalgia, and again, completely valid. But
I mean, in terms of why I'd recommend it, it's a competent King story. It's a good story, and it's I definitely, there's a lot of stories that I would like recommend people not read of Stephen King's. This would be on a list of things I would recommend
all right,
people
I get
read.
it. And technically, you did recommend it, so you cannot really give it a 0. Like you're
Yeah, I may not
going
make
to.
it number
But I
1
get
on the
it.
list, but I'll probably, I'd put it on the list.
Sure, and like I knew you were going to say that because that's sort of like your measuring stick for a lot of this stuff, which is I think it's a fun way to think about it. I think at the end of the day, I've convinced myself to give it possibly a soft 1.
Okay.
I think I agree with you. Like it's not his best thing. I'd be like, yeah, this one's pretty solid, but there's probably other stuff I recommend. But you know what? If you want to read this one, it's short enough. It's a good little tale, and you'll probably enjoy it.
Yeah, it's 10 pages. You can literally read it in 10 minutes.
So yeah, I'll give it a softer 1, but at the end of the day, still 1.
Well, thank you, because that makes my math very easily for the
Yes.
easy for the last part. So I gave it the lowest score in my curmudgeonly fashion with a 7. Scott, you gave it an 8.
Mm.
Chris, you gave it a 9. Giving an overall score of 8.
Yeah,
That's fair. That's a really, yeah.
It's a damn good story. While not maybe the best of King, but it's sort of like unfair even because he is one of the masters of the craft in this genre. But yeah, I still think it is a damn good story, and check it out for the season if you haven't yet. And if you're like Chris, maybe, and you had read it once upon a time and haven't in a couple years, do it again.
Yeah, it's a quick read, and it's worth it, I think. Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, gentlemen, I want to thank everybody listening for joining us for this episode of our MOTS Ado About Nothing. I've been here with Scott Thurlow.
And I will be in your closet, or maybe not. You'll find out.
Jonathan Ian Manzer.
I can't follow that one.
Yeah, I can't either. I'm Chris Morgan. Good night.
MOTS Ado About Nothing. MOTS Ado About Nothing. Music and editing by Chris Morgan.
MOTS Ado About Nothing.
This has been a Lost Signals production. All rights reserved.